Now you see them, now you don't. Premature deaths, this time on False Count Anywhere. We're going to try to make this episode a little lighthearted for y'all.
Good luck.
You know, there's been a lot of premature deaths in the world of professional wrestling, and if you watched our last episode of False Count Anywhere, we talked about a review that we did of the Iron Claw, which is about the Von Erich family, the storied, legendary Von Erich family, and that got me thinking, obviously, premature death is sort of wrapped up into the Von Erich legacy, unfortunately, and I thought it might be interesting to take a look at some wrestlers, some popular wrestlers, their lives, how they died, when they died, where they died, just the circumstances surrounding it. And I think what you'll find are some interesting patterns. Before we get started, a couple of interesting things. So I'm going to show a picture. Matt is actually looking at the pictures. So Matt is going to, because he's the professor, so he's going to tell us who he's looking at. And then we're going to talk a little bit about when they died, how they died, the circumstances behind their death, whatnot. One interesting thing of note, I picked 10. All 10 of these people died before they reached your age. All the people we're going to discuss are younger than you. You have lived longer than all of these people, which is just crazy because with some of them, you're like, holy crap. I did not know they were that young when they died.
Yeah.
So, first wrestler, I'm going to show up on the screen here. Who is it?
That is Reed Flair.
That is Reed Flair.
Youngest of Ric Flair.
He was. Do you know how he died?
I believe it was a drug overdose.
He had a drug overdose. Do you know how old he was?
He was young. He was in his late teens, early 20s.
He was 25 when he died.
Okay.
It was 2013. He was born February 26, 1988, and he died in early 2013. Now, my favorite fact about him is that he wrestled in WCW.
Yes, he did.
As a young 10-year-old boy.
He wrestled Eric Bischoff, I think, didn't he?
And he defeated Eric Bischoff in his only singles match in WCW as a 10-year-old boy. And on June 12, 2000, he returned to team with his dad, Rick, and they lost to David Flair and
Crowbar. No, Daphne.
Vince Russo.
Oh, my God.
In a tag team match.
Jeez.
Yeah. So that's my favorite fact about him. He, unfortunately, he had a drug overdose, obviously struggled with his life, was found unresponsive. It's a very standard story. Drug overdose, very common here. But, huge impact on his family. Obviously, the loss.
Directly or indirectly led to Charlotte Flair taking up wrestling. And
he did most of his work on the indie circuit. I mean, he was still kind of making his way in the business, but he definitely had the right personality, the right flair, as it were, for the business. All right. Now we get into some more interesting ones here. We're going to age ourselves up a little bit. Number 2.
That is Elroy Jetson, better known as Crash Holly.
That is Crash Holly, Elroy Jetson. How did he go? This is a mix. This is a mix of our two favorites.
Oh, I was going to say drugs again, but
suicide by drug overdose.
It was drugs. Okay. I think a lot of these are going to be right.
He was 32. He died in 2003. He died at Stevie Richards' house.
Oh, I didn't know that.
In Florida. He was 32. They found him partially clothed with a pool of vomit around his face, empty bottles of prescription drug Carissaporidol, and a partially consumed bottle of alcohol were found nearby. He had just been served divorce papers from his wife. His death, which was caused by choking on his own vomit, was officially ruled a suicide, and he's buried in North Carolina. He was only 32. 32 years old, which shocked me. My favorite little fun fact about Crash, or Crash Holly as he's more commonly known, is that he basically created the concept of 24/7, 24/7 championship.
That was all around him. Yep.
When he took over the hardcore championship. He said anytime, any place, anywhere, and I think he ended up holding it some insane number of times.
Yep.
Like 20.
It was like the 24/7.
Because he would lose it, yeah.
They would change it back and forth.
So he essentially invented that.
And the best ones were when he was at the Chuck E. Cheese place.
Yep.
And they're going through the ball.
Find him in public. Made for some very funny vignettes.
Yep.
All right, number 3. Who is it? If you don't know, I'm going to shoot you.
That is Test.
Without a doubt.
Andrew Martin.
Without a doubt, that is Test. Now, here I have to ask you, how old is that man when he dies?
28.
He is 33 when he dies. He had an accidental drug overdose.
Jeez.
Died in Florida in his home 4 days prior to what would have been his 34th birthday. Now, this is a little spooky. Police were contacted after a neighbor reportedly realized Martin had been laying motionless on his couch for some time, prompting them.
Looking in his windows?
I think just like on his couch in his living room with the windows open. They're just like, hey, I just walked by with my dog 2 hours ago and he was laying on the couch exactly like that. That's kind of weird. Authorities retrieved Martin's body after scaling his balcony to confirm his death. Toxicology reports revealed that it was caused by an accidental overdose of oxycodone. It was reported that in August 2008, he entered a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center in Florida after reaching out to WWE regarding his substance abuse and looking for some help. Forensic pathologists later determined that Martin had severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy. CTE, a brain condition caused by repeated concussions and concussive head injuries. Which of course this happened 2 years after the Chris Benoit incident. So CTE was actually just kind of starting to come to the forefront at this time.
Yeah, he wasn't a fantastic talker, but he was wickedly underrated in the ring. He was really good.
Yeah, he was like next generation Kevin Nash.
Yeah,
type.
His big boot was devastating.
Yeah, and he had he was on something. You don't get that kind of look without being on something. He was on something.
He got that big after he left WWE too. He did a short stint in TNA.
Yep, he did. Yep. Yeah, he looked nuts. Number 4.
I believe that is Adrian Adonis.
That is Adrian Adonis. I included both gimmicks.
And after.
Yeah, both gimmicks.
Definitely better known for the later gimmick.
When did he die? I know, that look makes it tough.
Yeah. 82.
88. How did he die? How do you think that guy died?
Drinking.
Car crash. This is another fascinating story, which is probably going to be the title of this video. So at this time, he had left WWF, but was trying to get back in. He lost a bunch of weight, and he was up in Canada, in Newfoundland, wrestling against Hartford Love. On July 4th in Newfoundland, he was in a minivan with William Mike Kelly Arco, Victor Pat Kelly Arco, and Dave McKinley.
Okay, now I remember the Dark Side of the Ring episode. Yep.
They all were killed when Victor...
bridge into a creek or something, right?
He was blinded by the setting sun, and he swerved to avoid hitting a moose, which caused the van to fall from a bridge into a creek below.
Yep.
He had severe head injuries and died a few hours later. William Arco was the sole survivor and sustained severe leg injuries.
Yeah, they were the twin wrestlers, and his twin died.
And so not only does he meet the age requirement, not only was he super popular, but one could make the argument that he was killed by a moose, which has got to be probably, even by professional wrestling standards, insanely unique. Number 5.
Owen Hart.
Probably the saddest story of this whole thing. How old was he?
He was in his mid-30s.
He was 34. This was 1999. I'm not even going to ask you because I know you know.
Over the edge.
In a piece of incredible irony, He fell to his death while prepping for his intro at the Over the Top.
Was it Over the Top?
Over the Top. No, Over the Edge. You're right. Over the Top is the Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not Sylvester Stallone.
Over the Edge, which was Over the Edge. There's a dark side of the ring. I'm not going to go into super big detail at it. I believe he was dressed in his blue blazer gimmick, right? Yes. When he died.
Which was like a superhero gimmick.
Yep. You definitely need to check out the dark side of the ring of this one. It is particularly interesting, and they go into just excruciating detail. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he ended up falling 78 feet and landed chest first on the top rope, approximately a foot from the nearest turnbuckle, which threw him into the ring. It must have been horrifying.
Yeah,
it must have been inconceivably horrifying. Lot of bad blood, obviously, between his widow and WWE.
Yep, he'll never be in the Hall of Fame.
No one doubts that he certainly deserved to be in the Hall of Fame, but he never will. I just want to make one comment. I give Jim Ross a lot of credit. They were on air when this happened.
Yep.
And they were
in between matches.
He didn't really mince any words about it. He was pretty open about basically telling them, like, hey, this is happening and it's not a part of the show.
He wanted the show to, everybody wanted the show to be over, and Vince made the call for the pay-per-view to keep going.
So huge controversial. So they took him to the hospital in Kansas City, and they tried to bring him back, but they couldn't. They determined that his cause of death was internal bleeding from blunt force trauma. The impact, he hit so hard that the impact severed his aorta.
Jesus.
It's literally in the middle of your chest, and he bled to death just a couple of minutes. He was dead probably by the time people even got to the ring to help him.
At first the crowd was cheering because they thought it was a part of the show, and then once he didn't start moving, then...
Yeah, that's just very... the whole thing is just unfortunate. The fact that it happened, the fact that it was handled the way that it was handled, it just, the whole thing, it was like everybody just made a bad decision throughout the entire course of the entire thing, unfortunately. All right, number 6.
Yokozuna.
How old was he? See, I thought he was way older than this.
Yeah, you'd think so, but no, he was like 30, 34, 35.
He was 34. Yeah. He died in 2000. How did he die?
Heart failure?
Pulmonary edema. He died in his sleep. He had pulmonary edema. He was in England on a tour.
Yep.
I think he was in Liverpool on a tour for All-Star Wrestling. And he was found by the cruise transport manager, and they brought paramedics in the hotel room. It took 6 men to move his body.
Mm-hmm. He was upwards of 600 pounds.
At the time, it was widely reported that he had a heart attack, but basically his lungs had become so filled with fluid that he basically drowned himself. Like, the fluid fills in the areas around the sac, the air sacs, and you just can't get air. So probably one of the more peaceful deaths. No drugs associated or anything. Number 7.
Brian Pillman.
How old was he?
32.
He was 35. This was in 1997, which was earlier than I thought. I thought he made it to 2000.
No, yeah. He was only back in WWE for a short time before it happened.
How did he die? This is another one you can get a dark side of the ring on.
I think they did do one.
On Brian Pillman, yeah.
I'm going to say drugs.
He had a heart attack via arthrosclerotic heart disease. So he was scheduled to wrestle Dude Love in Your House 18.
Yep.
And basically Jim Cornette was like, you need to find Pillman. We don't know where Pillman is. He's not at the show. So Jim contacted the motel in Minnesota and basically was told by the receptionist that they found him dead like hours and hours earlier, like at noon or something, 1 o'clock. They found him dead. They found that he had a heart attack and he had atherosclerotic heart disease, and his father died the same way, basically. Crazy Vince McMahon. Kind of a weird. So on Raw, they did a thing where Vince McMahon interviewed Melanie Perlman afterwards. You remember that? They talked about this.
Yep.
Kind of tacky and distasteful. It didn't go over well. It was very in poor taste. I believe it was voted Wrestling Observer Newsletter's most disgusting promotional tactic, which is something they should continue doing.
Way to go, Vince.
Well, I mean, when you're the only game in town, you're going to do a lot of good stuff and you're going to do a lot of bad stuff.
At that point, WCW was still around.
But, he was desperate for... Well, and again, you don't know how to handle that stuff because keep in mind, this is the age where the curtain is kind of being pulled back of kayfabe. This is the same period of time that the wars with WCW were going on. There's the curtain call. There's kind of all this stuff is kind of slowly peeling the curtain away. Mm-hmm. So you're not exactly sure how to handle stuff like that. But, of course, 10 years later, they have to deal with the Chris Benoit situation, and they didn't handle that much better. So, all right, number 8.
Umaga.
This is kind of one of the first ones I think some of our viewers might actually recognize here, because this guy was big time back in the 2008, 2009
and brother or
time
cousin
period.
To Yokozuna?
He was the brother of Yokozuna. How old was he?
I think he was still really young too. 32?
36.
Really? Wow, older.
Died in 2009. How did he die?
I think it was a lot of heart disease with their family.
Heart attack from drug intoxication.
Oh, it was drugs too. Okay.
This is kind of crazy. So he was laying on the couch in his Houston, Texas home, and his wife walks over to him, and she notices that he has a nosebleed. And she's like, hey, wake up. Doesn't wake up. So they call 911, and they take him. And basically they determine that he's having a heart attack. Like, this is like the paramedics, like in the ambulance, determine that he's having a heart attack. And they they restarted his heart. He had no signs of brain activity though. So he had a heart attack, but then died. They kept him on life support. He had another heart attack. Basically, the toxicology report showed that he had all kinds of hydrocodone, muscle relaxants, Valium, all kinds of downers, basically. And they even found that he had heart and liver disease, which ultimately led to his death. So not ironically, what's the word I'm looking for? Serendipitously, that same day, his two nephews, the Usos, signed their contract with Florida Championship Wrestling in 2009. So kind of a weird, I don't know, what do you call it? Like reincarnation, sort of career reincarnation on the same day that Umaga exits the stage, his two nephews enter. Kind of an odd serendipity there to that one. Number 9.
Bray Wyatt.
Obviously the biggest disappointment of 2023. How old was he?
36.
He was 36 years old. Died in August. How did he die?
It was a disease. I can't remember which one.
He had a heart attack.
It was a heart attack.
Which came from COVID-19 complications.
Oh, I thought there was something else too.
No, he was asleep in his home in Florida. A lot of Florida here. And basically he was dealing with some kind of an illness ever since February, which is why he disappeared. Came back, I think, briefly in July or something for a week or two. He came back basically to make an appearance, maybe record some stuff. There were reports, I remember this, coming out saying like, hey, he's going to be making a comeback.
Yeah, they had all kinds of plans.
And I think he had COVID-19 that exacerbated a pre-existing condition, a heart condition that he'd been dealing with. He'd been hospitalized for a heart issue a week before his death and was advised to wear a defibrillator. However, tragically, he was not wearing the defibrillator at the time of his death, and during the investigation, police officers found it in his car. So one wonders what might have changed. So if your doctor tells you to wear a defibrillator, I might want to think about doing it. Last but certainly not least, number 10, the late great
Eddie Guerrero.
When did he die?
2006.
2005. How old was he?
that's right. He died before Benoit. 38.
38. Does that look like a 38-year-old man?
Not at all.
That does not look like 38 to me. Yeah. Chavo found him.
In his hotel room.
Yep. Chavo Guerrero found him unconscious in his hotel room in Minneapolis. And I guess he had passed out in his hotel room, literally with a toothbrush in his hand, and was found alive. And by the time the ambulance and the paramedics showed up, they pronounced him dead, I should say. He died as a result of acute heart failure due to underlying atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. His funeral service was officiated by superstar Billy Graham, who would later be buried nearby when he died last year in 2023. So I think when people think about professional wrestlers, they think about two things. They think about accidents in the ring, and they think about hard, fast lifestyle. But, you know, when you look at a lot of the tragedies, you see kind of what I think, again, I'm just eyeballing the list. And to be honest with you, I didn't look past 40 because it only gets crazier.
Right.
But this is like, these are people that died like either entering into or in the prime of their careers. And you see a 50-50 mix. I mean, you see a lot of suicide, but you see a lot of like, I don't know what you'd call them. You'd call them like overuse injuries. A lot of like, I'd been taking these painkillers for a real long period of time to treat my injuries, and it exacerbated some kind of heart condition that I had, or it weakened my liver, or, you know, I can't see the sun and I didn't want to hit a moose. You know, you see there's a pretty, I guess it's not the kind of death that you would imagine seeing.
Right.
You know, that's kind of what surprised me about it. You expect to see a lot of suicide and depression and that kind of stuff. And it struck me at how the industry has kind of escaped scrutiny regarding mental health, especially in the age that we live in now. Of mental health orientation. You don't see a lot of focus on that kind of a thing, you know, which just struck me as very interesting. Something WWE might want to consider. But yeah, I didn't even look in the 40s and 50s and 60s, but I'm sure it gets even worse because these kinds of things that they're experiencing only get worse down the road.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my list of the popular people who died too young. I think people who watch this show are going to recognize most of those names. And I got to tell you, I was shocked when I saw some of the, I mean, it was like, there's like a brick wall at 34 and like nobody makes it past it. Adrian Adonis, 34, Owen Hart, 34, Yokozuna, 34, Brian Pillman, 35, like, you know, kind of crazy how there are these lines of delineation going on.
Yeah.
So the only good news, I guess, is I could only find a couple of wrestlers that died before they were 30. I had to include Reed Flair in that one.
Yep.
So anyways, let us know down below. Who's your favorite wrestler that died too early, and when did they die? I'd be interested to hear. What
could have been with these guys?
Was your favorite wrestler? Has any of your favorite wrestlers died young?
Well, I mean, at the time, Benoit was a major hit.
Yeah,
really liked him.
Yeah, especially the circumstances surrounding
Eddie
him.
and Bray, Test, who I mentioned. I mean, they were all fantastic and could have done so much more.
Yeah, it really kind of makes you wonder.
I mean, imagine if Yokozuna had survived to today and he was still walking around. How many more things he could have done?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely was a kind of an innovator. I mean, you wouldn't really think about him as an innovator, but he really,
Big move for a big man.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of made that a thing. Like, if you were going to be you couldn't just Andre the Giant your way through the business anymore. You had to have some kind of agility. And when you see wrestlers that you like now, like Black Taurus or Samoa Joe, like any big guy that has the agility of a cat, you know, you can thank Yokozuna for setting that precedent.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely changed the industry. Well, let us know down below what you think. We'd love to hear it. In the meantime, you keep watching. We'll keep wrestling with the business.